It started with a smell, not a lingering scent from a neighbor's cooking, not the comforting warmth of wood in a fireplace. This was sharp, thin, acrid, smoke, the kind that clings to your skin and settles in your lungs, refusing to leave. I froze in the doorway of my apartment, my grocery bag cutting into my fingers as I stood there, just breathing. The air was stale from being shut up for days, but the scent didn't belong here. I'd only moved back 3 days ago after the fire, the one that had almost turned everything I owned into ash. It had started in the unit below mine, spreading upward with greedy orange tongues that licked at my door. The firefighters had stopped it just in time, but the smell had lingered in my dreams, even after they'd cleaned the place. I told myself this was the same thing, memory playing tricks on me, like when a song gets stuck in your head. That night, I went to bed early, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. I woke up choking. It wasn't the startled gasp of a bad dream. It was real. Lungs straining as if I'd been breathing smoke for hours. The scent was thicker now, oppressive, curling through the room like it belonged there. Not again, I muttered, stumbling from bed. My bare feet slapped against the cold floor as I moved through the apartment, checking every possible source. The stove was cold, outlets fine, heater off. No fire, no smoldering wires. Everything was fine. Except it wasn't. When I sat back down in bed, my eyes landed on the nightstand. Along the edge, faint scorch marks ran like a jagged scar across the wood. My throat went dry. I hadn't lit a candle in weeks. I hadn't burned anything. And yet, here they were. I reached out, touching the edge of one mark. It was cool under my fingertips. I didn't want to stay in the bedroom. I grabbed my blanket and curled up on the couch, but the smell followed me, faint but steady, as if it knew I couldn't escape it. By the time dawn lit the window, I felt like I'd been holding my breath all night. Work was no better. The scent trailed me into the break room, followed me into the bathroom, drifted under my nose, even in the middle of an afternoon meeting. Nobody else noticed. Smoke? My coworker asked when I finally mentioned it. No, I don't smell anything. Are you okay? I wasn't sure. By the time I got home, I had convinced myself it was stress, a symptom of the fire trauma. Like my therapist had warned me about phantom smells. Heightened paranoia. That theory lasted exactly 3 seconds after I stepped inside. The scent slammed into me like a wave. My eyes darted toward the nightstand. The scorch marks had spread. Nothing else looked out of place. And yet, the air felt heavier, warmer. I opened the windows, ran the fan, even lit one of those overly sweet candles I keep for guests. It didn't help. By the time I showered and went to bed, the smoke clung to me like invisible residue. I dreamed of suffocating under a thick gray haze. The sound woke me. It was faint at first, so subtle, I thought I'd imagined it. A delicate crackle, like dry leaves catching fire. I held my breath, straining to hear it again. There it was. Not from the street, not from a neighbor's TV. It was inside the walls. I told myself it was the wind or the pipes. Anything but what it really sounded like. Still, my chest tightened as I eased out of bed. The sound seemed to fade as I moved through the apartment. Kitchen cold, bathroom empty, closets untouched. When I came back to the bedroom, my heart stopped. The scorch marks on the nightstand had deepened. They were no longer faint lines. They were darker, charred, as if something had burned into the wood while I was gone. I reached out, ice cold. The next morning, I put on gloves and attacked the marks with vinegar, bleach, steel wool, nothing. Touched them. It was as if the burns had been etched into the grain itself. Then I noticed something else. The corner of a photograph on my desk was blackened, curling in on itself. A faint scorch marred the paint on the windowsill. A thin layer of ash dusted my laptop keys. It looked like someone had breathed smoke into every corner of my room. I called my landlord. When he arrived, irritation gave way to visible discomfort as he traced a finger over the blackened wood. This wasn't here during the inspection, he muttered. You didn't light anything, did you? No, I said, sharper then. I intended. I haven't lit anything since the fire. He gave me a long look, said nothing else. Then he left. That night, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, searching for something, anything that made sense. Most sites offered rational explanations: lingering chemical residue, stress-induced sensory hallucinations. None of them accounted for scorch marks that deepened overnight. Then I found a forum. People were describing the exact same thing: phantom smoke, ash, burn marks that appeared from nowhere. One comment stood out: sometimes it's not about what you smell or see, it's about what's following you. That night, I dreamed of fire. Not just flames, but a roaring, all-consuming blaze that surrounded me. I didn't burn. I froze. The dream stayed with me all morning, clinging to the edges of my thoughts like soot to skin. I kept seeing flashes of it while brushing my teeth, making coffee, walking to the bus stop. The fire had been too real. The heat on my face. The sound of crackling. The sensation of standing in the middle of destruction, not as a victim, but as something else. I couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something. By mid-afternoon, my hands were trembling so badly I had to leave work. Early, I spent the bus ride staring at the blurred city through the window. My reflection ghosted over the glass. My eyes looked wrong, dull, tired, and there it was again. The smell. It hit me halfway home, sharp, bitter, and strong enough that my throat tightened. No one else on the bus reacted. Not the woman scrolling through her phone. Not the man. Asleep 2 rows ahead, it was just me. Always me. I needed answers, but my landlord had been useless, and the internet was a rabbit hole of paranoia. There's only one person left to call. My grandmother answered on the 3rd ring, her voice still strong despite her age. Claire? Is everything alright? No, I said before I could stop myself. My voice cracked. Something's been happening. There's this smell, smoke, and it's everywhere. Even at work. Even when I'm outside. And now, I'm finding scorch marks and ash. I don't know what's going on. A long silence, then a sigh that seemed to carry decades. I was hoping this would skip you, she said quietly. Skip me? My stomach turned. What does that mean? She hesitated. Your great-grandfather died in a house fire. Everyone knows that. But what most don't know is why. There were rumors, whispers that it wasn't an accident. Someone said it, and since then there's been a pattern. A pattern, I repeated. My hand tightened on the phone. What kind of pattern? Strange things, smells, dreams, accidents, warnings. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's her voice trailed off. More than that. The line was quiet except for the faint sound of her breathing. You think this is connected to him? I asked. I don't think Claire, I know. I swallowed hard. I didn't tell her about the locket. It sat against my skin as I spoke. The tarnished silver, heavier than usual. My mother had given it to me just before she passed, and I'd only started wearing it again a few weeks before the fire. I told myself it was just coincidence. After I hung up, I went to the bathroom mirror and unclasped it, holding it in my palm. The metal was warm, too warm, as if it had been lying in sunlight. I hadn't been outside all day. I set it on the counter, watched it, waited. It didn't move, didn't smoke, didn't do anything but sit there, looking harmless. Still, when I picked it back up, the weight of it made my chest ache. That night, the smell was worse than ever. It curled under the door frames and seeped into the blankets, wrapping around me in the dark. I kept my eyes open, afraid that if I closed them, I'd see the fire again. But exhaustion won. I woke gasping, the air thick and hard to breathe. And I wasn't alone. In the corner of my room, a shadow stood perfectly still, tall, human-shaped, but wrong. My brain tried to rationalize it as a trick of the light, an illusion caused by the street lamp outside. But street lamps don't breathe. I could hear its slow, deep breaths, like someone dragging air into burned lungs. My eyes stung. The smoke, was heavier now, burning my throat. I blinked. The shadow was gone. The next morning, my apartment felt colder. The smell lingered, faint but stubborn, clinging to my hair and clothes. I showered twice before work, scrubbing until my skin was raw. It didn't help. Everywhere I went, the scent followed. On the train, in the elevator, in the break room. That evening, I went searching for something I swore I'd never try. The kind of spiritual cleansing. Shops you only see in back alleys or sandwiched between pawn shops and tattoo parlors. The place smelled like incense and dust. The woman behind the counter didn't look surprised when I told her I needed to get rid of something attached to me. She sold me a bundle of sage, a black candle, and a jar of coarse salt. She also handed me a folded piece of paper with instructions written in looping, slanted handwriting. "You have to mean it when you speak," she said, her voice low. "Otherwise, it'll just stay." That night, I followed her instructions to the letter. Lights off, candle lit, sage burning, smoke curling toward the ceiling. I sat cross-legged. On the floor, the locket in one hand, chanting the words exactly as written. At first, nothing happened. Then the air shifted. The temperature dropped so fast I saw my breath. A pressure built in my chest, pushing me forward until I was almost bowing to the floor. The smell of smoke swelled until it was all I could taste. Somewhere in the walls, the faint crackling began again. And then came the whispers. They weren't in any language I knew, just fragments of sound, overlapping, circling me. One voice grew louder, breaking through the others. "Why?" It rasped. "Why? Why?" I clenched the locket until my palm burned. The metal was scorching hot now, branding my skin. The shadow shifted in the candlelight, and he stepped forward. He was exactly as I'd seen him in my dreams. Skin blackened and cracked, like scorched wood ready to splinter. His eyes glowed, faintly, not bright, not like the raging heart of a fire, but like embers that refused to die. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, shoulders hunched, the sound of his breathing a harsh rasp, as though every inhale dragged shards of glass through his throat. The air was thick with the smell of him, not just smoke, but wet ash, charred flesh, and something metallic underneath. My voice failed me. The chant I'd been reciting was gone from my mind, the paper with the words lying forgotten on the floor. He took one step forward. The shadows seemed to move with him, stretching unnaturally across the walls. "You'll burn," he said. The words were low, almost conversational, but they vibrated in my bones, rattled my teeth. I tried to speak, but the only sound I made was a choked gasp. The candle's flame flared high, casting his figure in a brief, blinding light. For that split second, I could see more than the ruin. I saw a man, broad-shouldered, dark hair, strong jaw, the kind of face that might have been handsome once. Then it was gone, replaced again by the charred mask of a corpse. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. He tilted his head like the question confused him. "Don't you know?" I shook my head, but the truth was, part of me did. My great-grandfather. The man my grandmother had said died in a fire. The man she'd implied was murdered. "I'm what's left," he said, and with each word, flakes of ash drifted from his skin and vanished before they hit the floor. "And soon, you will be too." The room darkened. The candle went out. The only light came from his eyes, faint but enough to see the outline of him, the ruin of him. He was closer now, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his form, though the air around us stayed icy cold. I thought about running, but my body wouldn't move. My legs were locked in place, my chest tight as though invisible hands were pressing down on it. "I didn't start the fire," he said suddenly. "They did, but I took it with me. And now..." His gaze dropped to the locket clenched in my hand. "You carry it." The metal seared my palm, and I cried out, dropping it. The chain clinked against the hardwood before lying still. The moment it left my hand, the smell intensified, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The burned man bent down toward it, his expression unreadable. "You should have left it where it was," he said, almost sadly. "Now it's yours," and just like that, he was gone. The pressure lifted from my chest. The crackling stopped. The smell faded. though it didn't vanish completely. It never did. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with every light in the apartment turned on. The locket lying in the middle of the coffee table like it was daring me to touch it again. At dawn, I wrapped it in a dish towel and shoved it into a drawer. It didn't help. By evening, the smell was back in full force, and this time, it wasn't confined to the apartment. It followed me when I went to get groceries. It clung to me while I stood in line at the pharmacy. I could feel people giving me strange looks, as if they could smell it, but were too polite or too afraid to say anything. When I came home, there was ash on my bedspread. Small, dark specks scattered across the white fabric. I checked the ceiling, the light fixture, the vents, nothing. The ash was just there. I called my grandmother again. She answered quickly, like she'd been waiting. "He came to me," I said. My voice shook. "I think it's him, great-grandfather." He said the fire wasn't his fault. That they did it. Silence. "Grandma?" Her voice was small when it came. "Then it's worse than I thought." "What do you mean?" "He doesn't usually speak. If he's talking to you, he's close. And if he's close..." She took a shaky breath. "Claire, you have to get rid of the locket," I tried. "I put it away." "No," she cut in. "Not hide it. Destroy it. Destroy it." The words rolled around in my head long after we hung up. The problem was, I'd tried that once before, years ago, when I first inherited after my mother's funeral. I'd thrown it into the garbage, only to find it sitting on my dresser the next morning. I'd convinced myself I'd just imagined throwing it away. Now I wasn't so sure. I picked it up again that night, my skin crawling at the heat of it. The moment I touched it, I heard him. Not in the room, in my head. A low, steady whisper. "You'll burn." Just like I did. I woke the next morning with a headache that felt like it had been carved into my skull. My dreams had been vivid flashes of my grandmother's face. The sound of her voice calling my name and that overpowering perfume. I staggered to the kitchen for coffee, but when I passed the living room, I stopped. The perfume was back, strong. It wasn't faint and fleeting like before. It was clinging to the air like smoke, heavy enough to make my throat tighten. It seemed to seep from the wall behind the mantel, the exact place I'd found the music box the day before. I dropped my coffee mug onto the rug and pushed the couch aside. My heart was hammering as I pressed my hands against the wallpaper. The smell grew stronger. It was absurd, but I started tearing the paper away. The brittle pattern peeled in long strips, revealing the yellowed plaster underneath. My nails caught on something, a seam, a thin line running vertically down the wall. There was a door. No, not a real door, more like a panel, the edges hidden beneath layers of paper and paint. My breath caught as I pried at it with the edge of a screwdriver from the kitchen. It popped open suddenly, and a shower of dust coated my hands. Inside was a small hollow, no deeper than a foot. Stacked neatly within were envelopes, dozens of them, all dressed in my grandmother's handwriting. My knees nearly gave out. The top envelope was addressed to me, but the date in the corner froze my blood. It was dated 3 weeks ago. She had been dead for 12 years. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in her looping script. "Evelyn, my sweet girl. If you're reading this, it means you found what I left for you. Don't let it in. Don't answer when it calls. And whatever you do, don't open the music box again." I stared at the words, my pulse roaring in my ears. It in her warning wasn't explained. There was no context, no signature beyond the familiar "Love, Grandma." I opened another envelope at random, this one addressed to someone named Margaret. The date was from 1975. The message was shorter. "It comes for those who keep it too long. Pass it on when you feel the cold." The rest were similar cryptic warnings to different names, each one dated years apart. Some were smeared with something brown. Some had jagged tears, as if someone had tried to destroy them. I backed away, my stomach turning. The perfume had shifted now. It wasn't comforting anymore. It was sharp, almost chemical, like it was burning my nostrils. That was when the knock came at the front door. I froze. It was early, barely past dawn. No one should be here. The knock came again, louder this time. I crept toward the window and peeked through the curtain. A woman stood on the porch, her back to me. She wore a long dark coat, her hair in a tight bun. She wasn't moving, just standing perfectly still, facing the street. Something about her posture made my skin crawl. It was too rigid, too unnatural. She slowly turned her head, just enough that I could see her profile. Her face was wrong, too pale, her eyes sunken and wide. She was smiling, but it didn't look human. My breath fogged the glass as I stepped back. That was when the music box began to play again, muffled through the wall where I'd found it. I hadn't touched it since the night before. The knock came a third time, but now it wasn't from the front door. It was from the wall. I dropped the curtain and backed away, my mind racing. Grandma's letter repeated in my head like a warning bell. Don't answer when it calls. But what did that mean? Did answering mean opening the door? Speaking to the woman outside? Or was it something else entirely? The music box's melody grew louder, and I realized it wasn't just coming from the wall anymore. It was all around me, vibrating through the floorboards. The smell of perfume thickened until I could almost taste it. My vision blurred at the edges, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse and breathe. Then the woman's voice drifted in, low and sing-song. Evelyn, open the door. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I stumbled to the panel in the wall, shoving the letters back inside and slamming it shut. The melody faltered for a moment, like it had been interrupted. The knocking stopped. I stood there, gasping, clutching the screwdriver like a weapon. The house went still, but I knew it wasn't over. The perfume lingered, wrapping around me like invisible hands, and the faintest echo of the music box whispered from somewhere deep beneath the floor. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. Whatever my grandmother had warned me about, it wasn't just in the house, it was part of it. The television's screen flickered with a faint static glow, bathing the room in a pale, ghostly light. I hadn't turned it on. The remote was still on the floor, where I had dropped it earlier, but the screen pulsed as if it were alive. The feed showed the hotel hallway again, except this time the carpet was drenched in shadow. My door stood at the far end, barely visible in the dimness. Something moved slow, deliberate emerging from around the corner. At first, it was just a distortion in the pixels, like the camera was glitching. But the shape grew clearer with every second, until I could see the outline of a tall, thin figure. Its head scraped the ceiling. Its arms hung too low, fingertips dragging along the walls. And it was coming straight from my room. My heart slammed against my ribs, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to look away, to smash the TV, to hide, but I couldn't move. It felt like the air around me had thickened, holding me in place. The feed crackled. The angle shifted, zooming in unnaturally fast until the camera was right at my door. The door handle twitched. I heard it in real life too, the sharp, metallic rattle of my door's lock being tested from the other side. I bolted forward, shoving the dresser in front of the door. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it mid-push, but I managed to. Wedge it tight. The knocking began, slow at first, then harder, louder. The TV's audio buzzed with static, but through it, I could hear something else breathing. Long, wet inhalations. Then, my own voice. Let me in. I froze. It was me, my exact tone, cadence, everything. But I hadn't spoken. The TV feed changed again. Now it was inside my room. The dresser wasn't there. The figure was. It stood by the bed, leaning over, as if inspecting something. The camera angle tilted down, and I saw myself lying there, asleep. My breathing on screen was steady, calm. The figure slowly reached out with one impossibly long hand, lowering it toward my face. I backed away from the TV, my pulse roaring. In my ears, I grabbed my bag, my jacket, anything I could carry, and made for the window. I didn't care if I was on the 4th floor. I'd take my chances. I yanked the curtains open. And there, reflected in the glass, wasn't my room. It was the hallway again. The figure was closer. I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. The crash didn't break the spell. My reflection, or whatever it was, kept moving forward in the glass until its head filled the entire pane. The power in the room died. The TV went dark. The hallway outside went silent. I stayed frozen in the dark for what felt like hours, barely breathing, waiting for anything to happen. Finally, I heard it, not from the hallway, from the closet. 3 slow knocks. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I slid to the far corner of the room, clutching my phone like it was a weapon, and waited for daylight. When morning finally came, the power returned. The TV flickered back on automatically. It was still the hotel hallway feed. But now, my door was wide open, and the room was empty. No dresser, no bed, no me. Just an endless, yawning blackness where the walls should have been. I didn't wait to see what would crawl out of it. I left everything behind, bolted down the stairs, and didn't stop running until I was out of town. I haven't gone back. I never will. But last night, I turned on the TV in my apartment. The screen flickered, and I saw my own hallway. The house was too quiet. It wasn't just the kind of quiet you get when you're alone. It was the heavy, suffocating kind that seemed to push in from all sides. I'd spent the entire day unpacking, moving from room to room, opening boxes, and trying to make the old place feel like mine. The floors creaked under every step, and the walls seemed to groan whenever the wind picked up outside. It was an old Victorian, the kind of house you imagine belongs in an oil painting or a ghost story. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was sitting cross-legged down the living room floor. My dinner reheated slice of pizza balanced on a paper plate beside me. Boxes were stacked against the walls like silent sentries. The lamp on the end table threw long, uneven shadows across the room. I could hear the occasional tick from the baseboard heater, the faint rattle of a window pane, and then something else. At first, I thought it was the TV in the other room, except the TV wasn't on. It was faint, muffled, like the sound of someone talking through a wall, a high-pitched voice, a child's voice. My hand froze halfway to my mouth, the pizza slice trembling slightly. I held my breath, straining to hear. The voice came again, softer this time, like a whisper meant for someone else. I couldn't make out the words. I put the pizza down and stood up slowly, my heart starting to pound in my ears. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding strange in the stillness. The whispering stopped. For a few seconds, the silence returned thicker than before the old house made another long, groaning sound as though settling deeper into its foundation. I told myself it was just the wind slipping through. Cracks in the siding, maybe catching on something in the vents. I'd read somewhere that old houses talk at night. That was all. Still, I found myself wandering toward the hallway, bare feet padding across the worn floorboards. The air felt cooler here, the shadows deeper. "Hello?" I tried again. Somewhere ahead, down the hall, a floorboard creaked. I stopped. The sound wasn't mine. The hallway ended at the base of the staircase, the kind with a carved banister that curled upward in a slow spiral. The upstairs was still mostly dark. There were no working bulbs in the hallway light yet, and I hadn't unpacked the floor lamps. My gaze lingered on the top of the stairs. For the briefest second, I thought I saw a movement like a shadow darting out of sight. I swallowed hard. Is someone up there? No answer. My landlord, Mrs. Kinsey, had told me the place had been empty for years. Too drafty for most people, too much upkeep, she'd said, her smile tight and unreadable. When I'd asked about the strange discoloration on the upstairs hallway wall during my walkthrough, she just waved it off. Old paint. This house has history. History. I was starting to wonder what exactly she'd meant by that. I stood there for a long time, staring up into the darkness, every instinct telling me to grab my keys and leave. But my rational side, the one that didn't want to admit I was spooked in my own home, finally won out. It's an old house, I muttered to myself. Old houses make noises. I went back to the living room, flicked on the TV for some background noise, and tried to ignore the way my skin still prickled. For a while, it worked. I half watched some late night sitcom reruns, laughing at all the wrong moments. But just as I was starting to relax, I heard it again. Only this time, it was closer. It came from the kitchen. I muted the TV. My pulse jumped in my throat. The sound was faint, but unmistakable, a giggle. Not the kind of laugh that bursts out in joy. This was softer, slower, almost like it was being held back, as though whoever was laughing didn't want to be heard. I stood up, my legs stiff. The kitchen doorway yawned open like a black hole in the wall. I took one cautious step, then another, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. The giggle stopped just as I crossed the threshold. I flicked the light switch. The overhead bulb buzzed to life, casting pale yellow light over the empty counters. The kitchen smelled faintly of dust and something else. Something sweet, like sugar cookies, long gone stale. Hello? My voice was barely above a whisper now. Silence. I checked the pantry, the back door, even the small crawl space under the sink. Nothing. I was about to turn back when something caught my eye. On the far side of the room, next to the refrigerator, there was a small door I hadn't noticed before. It was barely 4 feet high, painted to match the wall. A cupboard? A dumbwaiter? I crouched and tried the handle. It was locked. From somewhere inside, just beyond that thin strip of wood, I heard the faintest sound. A whisper. I jerked back so fast I nearly fell over. It was only one word, but it was enough to freeze me in place. It had said my name. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. My eyes closed, but my ears stayed alert, straining for the sound of that child's voice again. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the siding, made my chest tighten. By morning, I convinced myself it had been exhaustion. Moving was stressful. Old houses made noises. My mind had simply filled in the gaps. But then, while unpacking in the hallway outside the bedroom, I heard it again. Please. I froze, halfway through sliding a stack of books onto the shelf. This time, it was clearer, still small and faint, but not swallowed by the air like before. It sounded like a little girl. The voice came from behind me and slightly above. I turned slowly. The hallway ceiling had a square panel, an attic hatch I hadn't noticed before. It was painted over in the same color as the ceiling, but a faint outline marked its edges. I didn't remember seeing a ladder or rope hanging down. The voice didn't come again, but I stood there for a long time, staring at that panel. My skin prickled. The attic. It wasn't on the listing photos when I'd bought the house. In fact, the agent had never even mentioned it. I stepped backward until my back touched the opposite wall. Eyes locked on that square in the ceiling. The painted over seam seemed darker now, like it was shadowed from within. The smell came next subtle, but wrong. Damp wood, dust, and then something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. Then, faintly, something moved up there. I didn't breathe. There was a muffled shuffle, like fabric dragging over wood, then silence. I told myself I was being stupid. I forced my legs to move, walking briskly down the hall toward the kitchen, away from that panel. I didn't go back to unpacking that day. That evening, after forcing down some dinner, I curled up on the couch with my laptop. If there was an attic, I needed to know about it. I pulled up the inspection report from when I'd bought the house. It listed every room, even the crawl space under the kitchen floor, but there was no mention of an attic. I read it 3 times. Nothing. That's when the scratching started. It came from above slow, deliberate scrapes moving in short bursts, like someone dragging their fingernails across wood. I turned off the TV and listened. The sound would start, stop, then start again in a different spot overhead. My mind kept picturing a child on their hands and knees, crawling in the dark. I stood up, my throat dry, and looked toward the hallway. From where I stood, I could just make out the attic panel in the dim light. I forced myself closer. The scratching stopped, and then directly above me something knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My breath hitched, and every instinct screamed at me to back away. Instead, I whispered, "Hello," silence. I stayed rooted there for nearly a minute, waiting. My ears strained so hard they hurt. Then faintly, from just beyond that panel, came a sound I will never forget. A child giggling. It wasn't playful. It wasn't sweet. It was slow and strange, with a wet rasp at the end of each laugh, as though whoever it belonged to had been laughing for a very long time. I stumbled back until I hit the wall. My knees went weak. The laughter faded, replaced by that same faint shuffling. It moved away toward the far end of the attic, and then nothing. I barely slept again. The next morning I called the real estate agent. She seemed surprised when I mentioned the attic. "There's no attic," she said quickly. "The house was built without one. That panel is decorative. It's just covering part of the ventilation system." I almost believed her until she added, "It's sealed. You can't open it." I didn't like how fast she'd said it. After hanging up, I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and dragged it into the hallway. I stood on it, reaching out. My fingertips brushed the edge of the hatch. It was cold, far colder than the rest of the ceiling. I pressed harder, expecting it to be solid, but it shifted. Not much, just a fraction of an inch. Enough for a thin line of black to appear along the seam. It wasn't sealed at all. I pulled my hand back like I'd touched a hot stove. The smell came again, sweet, rotten, clinging to my nostrils. My skin crawled. I climbed down, pushed the chair back, and walked away, trying not to think about what I had just learned. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since moving in. I lay in bed, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard the patter of small feet above me. Not mice, not raccoons. Footsteps. They walked from one end of the attic to the other, slowly, stopping right above my bed. The air turned icy. I pulled the blankets to my chin, every muscle rigid. Then, directly above me came that same voice. "Please." It was clearer now, almost in my ear. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then it whispered something new, something that made my blood turn to ice. "Let me in." I don't know how long I stayed sitting on the couch after the shadow vanished. The room felt heavier, the air thick as if the house itself was holding its breath. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that the long day, the memories of Grandma, and the faint smell of her perfume had stirred something deep inside my imagination. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. It wasn't until my phone buzzed on the coffee table that I jumped and realized how tight my muscles had gotten. The screen lit up with a notification, an email from work. The normalcy of it was almost absurd in that moment. I tried to latch onto it, telling myself, "See, the real world still exists. You're not trapped in some nightmare." I opened the email, skimmed it, and replied. By the time I looked up, the house seemed quiet again. Too quiet. I decided to get ready for bed. The upstairs hallway was just, as I remembered from childhood, narrow. The walls close enough to almost brush your shoulders, with the faint groan of the floorboards under my feet. My bedroom was at the far end, across from the room that used to be Grandma's. I hesitated outside her door, fingers grazing the brass knob. I told myself I wasn't going in there. Not tonight. Inside my own room, I unpacked enough to make it feel livable. Sheets, a pillow, my charger, and a lamp for the nightstand. I left the light on while I brushed my teeth. When I came back, the lamp flickered once. Just once. I stared at it for a long moment. "Old wiring," I muttered. My voice sounded too loud in the small room. I slid under the covers, kept the lamp on, and tried to distract myself with my phone. Eventually, my eyelids grew heavy. I reached over and switched off the light. The darkness closed in quickly, thick and absolute. And then tap. It was faint at first. A single, deliberate tap. I sat up, straining to hear. Tap. Tap. It was coming from somewhere inside the house, not from the front door this time. The sound was closer, too close. I climbed out of bed and padded to the hallway. The air was cooler out there, as if the temperature had dropped a few degrees. The tapping grew louder as I moved toward the stairs, but it wasn't coming. From below, it was coming from Grandma's room. I froze outside her door. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might drown out the noise. But the taps kept coming, slow, steady, patient. Like whoever was making them knew I was listening. I swallowed hard and reached for the doorknob. My hand trembled. The brass was ice cold. I pushed the door open. The room is exactly as I remembered. The lace curtains, the floral bedspread, the framed pictures of long dead relatives on the walls. But the smell hit me first, lavender and roses, stronger than ever, almost choking in its sweetness. The tapping had stopped. I stepped inside, my bare feet brushing against the old rug. My eyes scanned the room, and then I saw it, on the vanity. Table, next to her silver hairbrush, was a small porcelain box. I remembered it vaguely. It used to hold her earrings. It was open now. I stepped closer. Inside was a folded piece of yellow paper. I reached out and unfolded it with trembling. Hands. The handwriting was hers. Don't let it out. Before I could even process the words, something moved behind me. The floorboard creaked. I turned. The door was swinging shut, and there was no one there. The night after the attic discovery, I barely slept. Even when I did, my dreams were stitched together from fragments of what I'd found: the little shoes, the rotting dress, the twisted iron bed. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the dust swirling in that narrow space, smell the damp rot, and feel the cold weight of that unseen presence sitting in the dark corner. By morning, the house felt heavier. Not just dusty or stale, but heavier, like the air itself had thickened. Every creak of the floorboards followed me as I moved from room to room. And though the sun poured in through the lace curtains, it didn't seem to reach the walls. I told myself I would ignore the attic dot, close the door, lock it, pretend it didn't exist. That worked for about 4 hours. Around noon, I heard it again, the lullaby. It was fainter this time, almost drowned beneath the whispering hiss of the wind outside, but I knew it was real. That old sing-song tune, the same one I'd heard the night before, the one that seemed to pull at something deep in my chest. It came from above, threading down through the ceiling like a spider lowering itself on an invisible strand. I dropped the plate I was drying. It didn't break, but the sound made me jump anyway. My hands were trembling. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, listening, every muscle rigid. The melody continued slow, sweet, and unbearably sad. It should have been impossible. There was no music box up there, no power. Nothing in that attic had moved in decades. And yet, I thought about leaving, just grabbing my bag, walking out, the door and not looking back. But the problem was, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I left now, it would follow me. Whatever it was, I climbed the stairs again, one hand clutching the banister, my breath sharp and quick. The song grew clearer with each step until by the time I reached the top landing, I could make out words, or at least I thought I could. They weren't English, but they carried the same rising and falling cadence of a mother singing her child to sleep. The attic door stood closed, but I didn't remember closing it after my last visit. I opened it. Cold air spilled out not. The natural chill of unused space, but something colder, sharper, like stepping into a cellar that hadn't seen daylight in years. The lullaby cut off instantly. Silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears strain and your skin prickle. I shone my phone's flashlight into the attic, scanning over the same scene I'd seen before. The bed, the boxes, the crumbling walls, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except the dress. It was no longer slumped on the chair that it was laid neatly on the bed, the way you might prepare clothes for someone to wear. I stumbled back a step, my phone nearly slipping from my grip. Something shifted in the corner, too small to be a person, too quick to be my imagination. A shadow moving where there should have been none. And then I heard it. A child's giggle. It came from directly behind me. I turned so fast I hit my shoulder against the doorframe, my flashlight jerking wildly across the landing. No one was there. But when I looked back at the attic, the bed was empty again. The dress gone. I slammed the attic door shut, and this time I locked it. That night, I slept with the light on dot, or at least I tried to, because sometime after midnight, the lullaby started again. Only now, it wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from right outside my bedroom door. I didn't sleep that night. Every time my eyes fluttered shut, the echo of that little girl's laughter crept back into my head. Sharper and closer, like someone pressing their lips right against my ear. I lay rigid in bed, counting the slow seconds until dawn, until I couldn't take this stillness anymore. When the sun finally bled pale light through my curtains, I got up with a single goal. I had to find where that voice was coming from. I started with the obvious. The attic, the basement, the crawl space beneath the porch. Nothing. The house groaned and whispered like it always did, but there were no signs of life. No toys, no footprints, no candy wrappers. Still, I kept moving. Around noon, I found myself in the upstairs hallway. Something about the far wall caught my attention. The wallpaper there didn't match perfectly with the rest. A faint outline traced the shape of what could have been a door frame, except there was no knob, no hinges. I'd pressed my palm to it. Cold. I leaned in, ear against the wall, holding my breath. Nothing. Then, as I started to pull away, it happened. Come play. The voice was so close, it might have been inside my skull. I stumbled back, my heart slamming in my chest. It hadn't come from behind me. It had come from the wall itself. I didn't care about the rational thing to do. I ran downstairs, grabbed the hammer from the kitchen drawer, and was back at the wall in seconds. I chipped away at the wallpaper, revealing brittle wood underneath. The smell hit me before the hole was big enough to see through. Rotting wood, damp, stale air, and something sweeter, like candy. When the hole was wide enough, I peered inside. My stomach clenched. There was a narrow room, maybe 4 feet wide, no windows. The walls were painted a pale yellow, peeling in curling strips. In the middle sat a single wooden rocking chair, and in that chair, a doll. Its porcelain face was cracked, one glass. Eye missing, the other staring directly at the hole I'd made. Its hair was matted, the faded ribbons barely clinging to the tufts. The thing sat perfectly still, hands in its lap, but the way its body slumped forward made it look like it had been watching me. I froze. Do you like her? The child's voice asked, clear, right in front of me. I jerked back from the hole. No one was there. The hallway was empty. My breathing came in quick, ragged bursts. Then the rocking chair began to move, slowly at first, a soft creak with each pass. Back and forth, back and forth. The doll stayed slumped, but I swear, its single glass eye followed me as I stepped away. I didn't remember going downstairs, didn't remember locking myself in the kitchen. I only realized I'd been sitting there for hours when the sun dipped below the horizon, throwing the room into shadows. That's when I heard it again. But this time, not from the wall, from the stairs. You found her? The voice was delighted now, almost giggling. I looked toward the hallway, my hand tightening around the kitchen knife I'd grabbed without thinking. Footsteps followed. Light, bare. The sound of tiny feet pattering down the stairs, stopping just outside the kitchen doorway. I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles ached. Silence. Then, from the darkness, the sound of something dragging across the floorboards. A dull scrape, something slid into view. The doll, its head lolled to the side, its hair sweeping the floor. It stopped just inside the doorway, as if it had been pushed there. She wants to play with you, the voice said, softer now. I didn't move. Couldn't. My mind screamed to leave, to grab my keys and run, but my legs wouldn't obey. That's when I saw it, not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A small hand. It curled around the door frame just above the doll, pale fingers tapping against the wood. Tap, 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 like it was counting. 1, 2, 3. The voice whispered along with it. The third tap echoed through the room, and every light in the house went out. The nursery door was open. It had been locked since I moved in. I never found a key, never forced it open. But tonight it was just open, as though it had been waiting for me to notice. The voice had called again, clearer than ever. Come play with me. The hallway stretched longer than it should, the shadows thickening with every step. My flashlight flickered, throwing shapes across the peeling wallpaper shapes that seemed too small to be my own. Inside, the nursery smelled of dust and something sweet, almost cloying, like rotting fruit. A rocking horse stood in the corner, its painted eyes cracked. A single crib sat against the wall. The mobile above it spun slowly, though no air moved. "Hello?" My voice shook. Something giggled. I turned, but there was no one. Then I saw. It touched deep into the far wall. Letters carved by something sharp. "Don't let him out." The voice spoke again, but this time it was behind me. "I'm not the one calling you." The air dropped to freezing. My flashlight beam slid over the crib. It was empty. And then it wasn't. A child sat inside, pale and still, hair hanging in damp strands. His eyes were black pits. He smiled too wide, too sharp. The walls groaned and the floor shuddered like something massive was moving under the house. The boy's head tilted. "He's coming." You opened the door. Behind me, something enormous began to rise from the shadows, long fingers curling. Over the walls, a face that wasn't a face stretching toward me. The last thing I heard before the light died was that same sweet, cold giggle. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you might get in a cozy countryside home, but a hollow, heavy silence that made you feel like the air itself was listening. It was my first night here, and the moving boxes still sat stacked. Like sentries along the living room walls, I had been unpacking all day, and my muscles ached in that deep, satisfying way that promised a good night's sleep, if only my mind would let me rest. I collapsed onto the couch, letting out a long breath. The cushion sagged in the middle, a reminder that this couch had been in the family for years. I used to visit this house as a child, back when my aunt owned it. She'd always kept it spotless. The kind of place where you felt like even the dust knew better than to settle. Now, it was mine. Or at least it would be once the bank stopped breathing down my neck. I told myself the stillness was normal. Old houses creak. They groan. They make you think someone's walking down the hallway when it's really just the wood adjusting to the temperature. But tonight felt different. The walls seemed to breathe. I sat there, sipping from a half-warm cup of tea, trying to convince myself that the faint hum in my ears was just the blood rushing through my head. That's when I heard it. A voice. Faint, high-pitched, not quite a whisper, not quite a song. It drifted from somewhere deep in the house, and it was just enough to make the hair on my arms stand on end. I froze mid-sip, my mug hovering inches. From my lips, it was a child's voice. "I don't have children. I live alone." My first thought was that maybe a neighbor's kid had wandered too close to the property. Or maybe the sound carried weirdly through the walls from outside. It's a big house, and sound travels in strange ways. But there was no mistaking it. It was coming from inside. I set the mug down slowly, listening. The voice stopped. For a moment, the only sound was my own heartbeat. I got up, moving toward the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my feet, a little too loud in the silence. I flicked on the light and scanned the corridor. It stretched long and narrow, the kind of hallway that always seems darker at the far end no matter how bright. The bulb is above you. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting how my voice cracked. No answer. I stood there for a full minute, waiting. The air felt heavy, pressing down on my shoulders, and the faint smell of dust and old wood filled my lungs. Finally, I shook my head and muttered, "It's just the house settling." That's what people always say in situations like this, isn't it? I had turned back toward the living room, but just as I did, I heard it again, closer this time. A soft giggle echoing from somewhere above me. I froze, tilting my head up toward the ceiling. The sound had come from the second floor, specifically from the guest bedroom. My aunt used to keep it locked. She said it was just for storage, but I'd never seen inside. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The air grew colder as I reached the landing, like walking into a space where sunlight had never touched. The guest bedroom door stood at the far end of the hall, shut tight. My fingers hovered over the doorknob. I told myself it was ridiculous to be afraid. It was probably a raccoon or a bird trapped inside, making noises. That just happened to sound like a child. But when I turned the knob and pushed the door open, the breath caught in my throat. The room was empty. No boxes, no furniture, just bare wooden floors and peeling wallpaper. A thin layer of dust covered everything, except for a small patch in the center of the floor. It was clean, like someone had been standing there recently. I stepped inside, the floor cool under my feet. The smell was different and here less dust, more like something sweet and faintly floral, almost like candy. Before I could think too much about it, a sudden rush of cold air swept past me, brushing against the back of my neck like invisible fingers. I spun around, but the doorway was empty. And then I heard it again. The giggle. Not from the hallway this time. From right behind me. The next night, I stayed up late again, not because I wanted to, but because my brain wouldn't. Let me stop replaying what had happened. I kept thinking about that soft knock, the strange little voice asking to play, and the fact that there were no children anywhere near this place. The wind outside rattled the loose siding and the faint scrape of tree branches against my window. Made me flinch more than once. I tried to distract myself by unpacking more boxes, but I couldn't stop glancing at the shadows in the corners of the room. Around midnight, I made myself some tea and sat down in the living room. My phone screen lit up my face in the otherwise dim room. For a while, nothing happened. Just the creaks of the old floorboards as the house settled. I almost convinced myself last night had been a mix of exhaustion and imagination. Then, at 12:17 a.m., I heard it again. The knock. It was exactly the same as before, 3 slow, deliberate taps on the wall. I froze mid-sip, my mug trembling slightly in my hands. "Hello," I called, feeling stupid the moment the word left my mouth. For a few seconds there was only silence, then it came. "Do you want to play with me?" My skin crawled. The voice sounded even closer this time, like it wasn't muffled by distance. Or walls. It was high-pitched and sing-song, but something about it was wrong, too slow, too deliberate. I swallowed hard and stood up, scanning the room. My eyes landed on the far corner, where the shadows seemed thicker than the rest. My gut told me the sound had come from there. I took one step toward it, my bare feet silent against the rug. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence again. I took another step. The air in that corner felt different, cooler, heavier somehow, like stepping into a damp basement. I crouched down, half expecting to find a small object, a toy maybe, that had somehow been triggering a sound. But there was nothing there. And then, right in my ear, like someone's mouth was inches away from it. "I'm right here." I yelped and stumbled backward, my mug slipping from my grip and shattering on the floor. Hot tea splashed across my ankle, but the burn barely registered over the sheer panic flooding my chest. I spun around. The room was empty. No footsteps. No shadows moving. No child. I backed away until I was pressed against the opposite wall, my breath coming fast and shallow. "Okay," I said to no one, my voice shaking. "You're just tired. You're imagining things. This house is old. It's just ... noises." But deep down, I knew it wasn't the house. Houses didn't breathe softly into your ear. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and pulled up the number for my friend Rachel. She was the closest thing I had to a lifeline. Out here. It rang twice before she picked up. "Do you know what time it is?" she groaned. "Ratch?" I said, pacing the living room. I think there's someone in my house." Instantly, her voice sharpened. "What do you mean? Like a burglar?" "No, I stopped, trying to find the right words. There's this voice, a child's voice. It's asking me to play. Twice now. Hold on." She interrupted. "Are you sure it's not a neighbor's kid? Or some kind of TV in the background?" "I don't have a TV yet," I said. Silence on her end. "Okay," she finally said. "Lock your doors, all of them. Check the windows, and if you hear it again, call me back. If it gets worse, call the cops." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, okay." We hung up, and I did exactly what she said. Checked every door, every window, all locked. When I finally went to bed, I left the light on. That night, I dreamt of a little girl standing at the foot of my bed. Her hair was long and matted, her dress tattered and stained. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. And when I woke up, my bedroom door was open. I always close it before I go to sleep. Always. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Even after I had locked every door, checked every window twice, and shoved a chair against my bedroom door, my mind kept circling back to the voice. I could still hear it in my head, those faint syllables, like a whisper spoken through cotton. I wanted to believe it was nothing. An echo. A dream. A trick of my stressed out brain after moving into a creaky, unfamiliar house, but my gut wouldn't let me believe that. I lay awake until past 3 in the morning, watching shadows shift on the ceiling from the occasional passing car outside. Each time the house settled with a groan or the wind brushed against the walls, my pulse jumped. My ears strained for that voice again, but the night remained still, eerily still, as if holding its breath. At some point, I must have drifted into a shallow sleep because the next thing I knew, sunlight was spilling into the room. I sat up immediately, the chair still wedged under the doorknob. It was exactly where I'd left it. For a brief moment, I convinced myself I overreacted. That was until I walked into the kitchen. On the table sat my coffee mug from the day before, except I hadn't left it there. I had washed it and set it on the drying rack. The handle faced me perfectly, as if someone had deliberately placed it that way. My stomach tightened. Maybe I was just misremembering. Maybe I had been more tired than I thought when I did the dishes. But then I noticed something else. On the rim of the mug, in the pale morning light, was the faint outline of a small handprint smudged. But unmistakable, it wasn't mine. I froze, every part of me wanting to grab my phone and call someone, anyone. What would I say? Hi, I think a ghost is rearranging my kitchenware. No, that wasn't going to sound sane. Instead, I cleaned the mug and tried to push the thought away, but the unease clung to me the entire day like a shadow. By evening, the memory of that handprint had hardened into something I couldn't ignore. I needed answers. I spent hours searching online local history forums, archived news clippings, even paranormal discussion boards. At first, there was nothing about my address. Then, buried in an old article from 30 years ago, I found it. Local tragedy strikes on Hollow Creek Road. The details were scarce, but the gist was chilling. A family had once lived here, a young couple and their daughter, Emily, who was just 6 years old. One winter night, she vanished from her bed. Despite a massive search, she was never found. The case had gone cold, and the parents eventually moved away. My throat went dry as I stared at the article. Emily, the voice I'd heard had been faint, but now I was certain it had sounded like a child. I didn't sleep that night either. The next evening, I tried something I wasn't sure. I believed in talking to it. I stood in the middle of the living room, the air heavy with anticipation. My voice shook as I spoke. Emily, is that your name? Silence. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to understand why you're here. At first, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, came the sound of running footsteps quick, like a child's bare feet on wood. They raced from one end of the hallway to the other, then stopped. I didn't move. Then came the voice again, faint, but clear this time, drifting from the direction of the back hallway. Don't open the door. My blood ran cold. What door? I whispered, but she didn't answer. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and a sudden chill wrapped around my neck like a scarf of ice. That was when I realized something. The hallway she had spoken from was the one that led to the small, locked storage room I had noticed during unpacking. The one I hadn't been able to open. Until that moment, I'd thought nothing of it, just a stuck door in an old house. But now it felt like something else entirely. That night, I dreamed of the door. In my dream, I was standing in front of it, my hand on the knob. I could hear scratching on the other side. Then, Slowly, it began to turn on its own. The door creaked open just an inch, and a cold, pale hand reached through the gap. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The sound of light footsteps echoed down the hall. I didn't sleep that night. Every time my eyes closed, I thought I could hear just barely threading her whispers through the stillness of the house. It was always my name. Sometimes it sounded urgent, sometimes soft, like she was trying not to wake someone else, but it never came from one spot. Sometimes from the left wall, sometimes from above the ceiling, sometimes from the air vents. By morning, my nerves were frayed. The coffee pot hissed as it brewed, but even the sound of boiling water felt like something pressing too close to my ears. My hands shook when I picked up my cup. I kept asking myself, why hadn't I left yet? I knew the answer. Curiosity. It had dug its claws deep into me. I needed to know what was happening in this house. Why there was a voice, why it sounded like a child, why it seemed to know me. By mid-morning, I decided I needed to search every inch of the house, attic to basement. I started with the attic. The narrow staircase groaned under my weight. The door creaked open to a small, cramped space smelling of dust and mothballs. Old boxes were stacked against the far wall, labeled in a spidery, faded handwriting. Winter clothes, Christmas ornaments, photo albums. I tore through them one by one. Nothing unusual, but when I reached the back corner, I found something different. A dollhouse. It was small enough to carry, painted white with chipped blue shutters. A thin layer of dust coated the roof, but when I touched it, a strange sensation crawled up my fingers like static. I set it on an old trunk and peered inside. The rooms were furnished tiny chairs, a kitchen table, little beds, but it wasn't a normal dollhouse layout. It was this house. Room for room? Exact. Even the furniture inside it matched mine. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the little windows. And then I froze. In one of the miniature bedrooms, the one that mirrored mine, there was a tiny figure standing at the foot of the bed. A little girl, carved from wood, her hair painted, dark and her dress pale blue. Her face was blank, smooth. Before I could stop myself, I reached for it. My fingers brushed the wooden figure, and from somewhere in the walls came a sharp, metallic clang. I jumped back, knocking over the dollhouse. Tiny furniture scattered across the attic floor. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. The sound came again, louder this time. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic. A slow, deliberate banging. 3 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. It was coming from inside the walls. I bolted downstairs, the sound following me, growing louder. The air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. My chest tightened as her voice cut through the banging. I'm here? I spun toward the sound. It came from the hallway near the basement door. My stomach dropped. That door had been locked since I moved in. The landlord said it was just a utility space, nothing to worry about. I'd tried it once before, it wouldn't budge. Now, though, the doorknob was rattling. Slowly, mechanically, like someone on the other side was testing it. I backed away, but my foot hit something, one of the little wooden chairs from the dollhouse. My mind kept racing back to the blank-faced figure in my miniature bedroom. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body just did it. I grabbed my phone, sprinted outside, and didn't stop until I was across the street. I stood there, chest heaving, staring at my own house. The curtains in the upstairs window, my bedroom window, shifted. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I saw her, a small silhouette, standing perfectly still, watching me. She didn't wave, she didn't move, but I swear I felt her voice in my head. You can't leave. The candle in my trembling. Hand burned low, wax dripping hot onto my fingers, but I didn't dare drop it. The wind outside battered the cabin like fists against a coffin, howling in a way that didn't sound entirely natural. I could still hear the voice from the diary, my own voice, except colder, more venomous ringing in my ears. It had said my name, it had told me to finish writing. The diary lay open on the table, its pages fluttering as though some invisible breath was turning them. Each blank sheet seemed expectant, waiting. I knew what would happen if I wrote at least I thought I did. Every word I'd written so far had bled into reality, twisting events like some malignant puppeteer's script. The last page had a single sentence already written in spidery ink. Close the book, and you'll never wake up again. I couldn't tell if it was a threat or a warning. Behind me, the sound of footsteps came from the kitchen slope. Deliberate. I didn't turn around. I already knew they wouldn't belong to anyone living. The cabin smelled of damp earth, of something recently dug up. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed down. Then, a whisper so close to my ear I felt the air shift. You've already written this ending. I spun around. The figure in the corner was me. Same hair, same clothes, same trembling in the hands. But the eyes. The eyes were black pits, and the mouth was stretched into a grin that didn't belong to any human face. You're not real, I said. The words more like a plea than defiance. Neither are you, it replied. It took a step forward, and my candle guttered. I stumbled back, my spine pressing against the table. The open diary between us. The other me glanced at it, then at me with a mocking tilt of its head. Go on, it whispered. Write it. End it. That's what you've been doing all along, writing your own death. The room felt like it was shrinking. The walls inched closer, groaning under some invisible pressure. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, panic clawing its way up. My throat, I grabbed the diary. The thing wearing my face moved faster than it should have been able to, but I was already backing toward the door. Stay away from me, I warned, though my voice shook so hard the words barely made it out. It laughed my laugh, but wrong, hollow, like it was echoing up from a well. You can't leave, it said. The last page hasn't been written. I turned and bolted for the front door. My hand twisted the knob, but it wouldn't turn. The wood under my palm felt soft, almost pulsing, like I was touching flesh instead of timber. I yanked harder, nothing. When I looked back, the other me was gone. The cabin felt empty again, too empty. That kind of silence doesn't come naturally. My gaze fell to the diary still clutched in my hand, and I realized there was now another. Sentence written under the first. Turn the page. Against every instinct screaming at me, I did. The next page was no longer blank. It was filled edge to edge with my handwriting describing, in perfect detail, everything I'd done since finding the diary. Every movement, every thought, every fear, even the words I'd just spoken. And at the very bottom, the last sentence wasn't yet complete. They turned to see what was behind them, and I dropped the diary and spun around. The other me was inches from my face. It didn't lunge, didn't speak, just looked at me, those black eyes widening as its grin spread farther than skin. Should allow. My candle finally went out, plunging us both into darkness. In the pitch black, I felt my hands wrap around my throat. I clawed and fought, but they were stronger, colder, and they squeezed until my lungs burned. I thought this was it. Then just spots began to burst in my vision. The grip loosened. I fell to the floor gasping. The cabin was empty again. The diary lay open beside me. The sentence was finished. They turned to see what was behind them and became the next story. The ink was still wet. I don't remember leaving the cabin, only stumbling into daylight hours later. The diary. Somehow in my backpack. I should have left it there, buried it, burned it. But I didn't. I brought it home. It sits on my desk now, closed, but I can hear the pages turning when I'm alone. And tonight, there's a new line written across the cover one that wasn't there before. If you're reading this, you're already part of it,